This is from Adewale Ademoyega's book. It says here, I went out to look for Okafor's group. I met Okafor himself coming from the Federal Guards barracks. What has happened to you and what have you achieved? I shouted at him. If I let me do like drama. I went out to look for Okafor's group. I met Okafor himself coming from the Federal Guards barracks. What has happened to you and what have you achieved? I shouted at him. I have just lost my command, Okafor said slowly. The news sent cold sweat through my spine. I almost shivered. Oh no, what have you done wrong? What's all this about? I spoke to my RSM just now and he nearly shot me. He said the GOC had been to the barracks. I did not meet him there, explained Okafor. What? Did he escape from you? I asked. Arrest him. I found that he was not there. He had not yet returned from the party. Which party? I asked. Everybody had left the party since 9 last night. No, it was another party. He had been to another party after Mimalari's party. Now he had been in here. He commanded the troops not to take any orders from me, and none of them would obey me now. In fact, they were ready to shoot me. It was shocking. It was horrible. If we could no longer use the Federal Guards, what troops could we use? Where were the men? Which was the force to rely upon? Why was it that your own group did not achieve anything? I asked Okafor. No answer. I returned to the main group at the officers' mess. Okafor came along with his bad news that General Ibrahim had not been found at home when he went there. He was said to have gone to another party after Mimalari's. You know what? I could go to what happened after that party in the book called Gowon, the biography of a social statesman. So he says, oh, but he had since surfaced at the Dodan barracks and succeeded in raising troops against us, claiming that he did not know what was happening. What if I told you that at this point, he had not even raised any troops against them? Nothing happened until past 5. And it happened at the behest of Gowon, not of, what's his name? Irasi. But it's not today's topic. Ayabala and Sheyi will go back to the real topic. The real thing we want to discuss today is just IBB's book. But please, Alpha, just calm down. Don't mention a book that you have not read. God bless you. Back to IBB. I always like to say that all these things that we're talking about, none of this information is new, and there's none of them that is hidden. They're just in books. All right. So he says, back to IBBs now. For instance, the head of the plot as Major Kaduna Zogbo was only Ibo in name. Born and raised in Kaduna, his immigrant parents were from Opanam in today's Delta State, which in 1966 was in the old Midwestern region. Nzogo spoke fluent Hausa and was as Hausa as any. He and his original team probably thought, even if naively, that they could turn things around for the better in the country. And that's what I was saying earlier, that if you really want to be objective, you would most likely arrive at this conclusion that Nzogo was revolutionary. He was not about an ethnic coup. He was not doing any Ibo coup himself and Ademoyega. And you can tell from 2 books and 1 resource you can find online right now. The resource you can find online right now is his speech on January 15 in Radio Kaduna. Read that speech. Read the book by Olusegun Obasanjo on Nzogo. Then read Adewale Ademoyega's book, where he also described Nzogo and what his own plan was, or what their plan was, why we struck. Put all those things together. He was a revolutionary. But that does not mean the coup was revolutionary. The coup was an Ibo coup. But let's continue. That said, it was heinously callous for Nzogo to have murdered Sir Ahmadu Bello and his wife Afsatu, because not only were they eminently adored by many, but also because they were said not to have put up a fight. From that moment, the Posh was infiltrated by outsiders. IBBO. From that moment, the Posh was infiltrated by outsiders to its supposed original intention, and it took on an unmistakably ethnic coloration, compounded by the fact that there were no related coup activities in the eastern region. Who is talking? IBB. I'll read to you again what he said. Remember I said, oh, I was a young officer. Probably ethnic sentiments did not drive the original objective. But from the moment Zogu murdered Ahmadu Bello, it was infiltrated by outsiders to its supposed original intention, and it took on an unmistakably ethnic coloration, compounded by the fact that there were no related coup activities in the eastern region. Nothing happened in the east. He's saying he took on an unmistakably ethnic coloration. What does that mean? It was an Ibo coup. Who is talking? IBB. The same book that people are shouting, they said it was not. That's what he said. He said, if you really think about it, the original intention may not have been ethnical, but at some point, it was infiltrated by outsiders to its supposed original intention, and it took on an unmistakably ethnic coloration, compounded by the fact that there were no related coup activities in the eastern region. There were 5 capitals in 66 and 1 place of interest: Lagos, Ibadan, Kaduna, Enugu, and Benin. 5 capitals. The place of interest is Calabar, where Awolowo was being held. Things happened. There was action in Lagos, Ibadan, and Kaduna. Nothing happened in Benin. Nothing happened in Enugu. Guess what those 2 places have in common? An Igbo premier. Calabar, nothing. Crickets. IBB said it took on an unmistakably ethnic coloration. I didn't say that. When they see, anytime they mention a book, read it yourself. Let's continue. It should, however, be borne in mind. Listen to, again, IBB is a dribbler, fantastic footballer as far as these things are concerned. So see what he said. It's not really that, but it was unmistakably ethnic. But, what's the but? Listen. It should, however, be borne in mind that some senior officers of Igbo extractions were also victims of General Coup. No, that's a lie. There was an officer, Arthur Negbe, who was a victim. He was a quartermaster. And that's why this man did not mention any name. IBB. Why? Because he's dribbling us. He says, it should, however, be borne in mind that some senior officers of Igbo extraction who, no names, were also victims of the General Coup. Who? No names. For instance, my erstwhile commander at the reconnaissance squadron in Kaduna, Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Chinyelu Unegbe, was brutally gunned down by his own brother in quote, Major Chris Foro, in the presence of his pregnant wife at his 7-Point Road residence in Apapa for merely being a threat to the revolution. Here's the issue. He mentioned Arthur Unegbe, but he didn't give us the names of the senior officers of Igbo extraction. For the Yorubas, Ademulegun and his wife, and the other person, Raushede. For the north, 4 people were killed. Memalari was killed, Kar Mohammed was killed, Lagema was killed, Palm was killed. For the east, cricket. No, it wasn't a senior officer. It says, bear in mind that senior officers of Igbo extraction were also victims. We don't have those names because they didn't exist. So it then says, as a disciplined and strict officer who, as the quartermaster general of the army, was also in charge of ammunition, weapons, equipment, vehicles, and other vital items for the army, the coup plotters feared that he might not cooperate with them. It should also be remembered that some non-Igbo officers, like Major Adewale Ademoyega, Captain Ganiyu Adeleke, Lieutenants Fola Oyewole, and Olafemiyon, took part in the failed coup. Again, this man is playing us. So let's quickly answer this. Did they take part in the coup? Oh yes, they did. Were they part of the coup plotters? No, they weren't. How do I know? Let's quickly do something. Time's a low board. We'll see what we can do. I'll read some to you here. I'll first read from Why We Struck, then I'm going to read from Nigeria's 5 Majors, then I'm going to read from Fola Oyewole's interview. So let's start with Why We Struck. Before midnight, this is from Adewale Ademoyega, who he mentioned. Before midnight, Onwobosi and his second in command were ready to move with about 25 of their battery men. At midnight, Onwobosi was waiting by the telephone. That's the one in Ibadan, the one that went to unalive the premiers, Chief S.L.A. Akintola. The one went to unalive the premier in Ibadan. That's Onwobosi. At midnight, Onwobosi was waiting by the telephone to receive the final order from Lagos to move. That's from Abeokuta to Lagos. Sorry, from Abeokuta to Ibadan to go and do the terrible thing he wanted to do. At about 23 hours, that's 11 p.m., a group of officers, please take a listen, please pay attention. No. At about 23 hours, 11 p.m., a group of officers were assembled at the military quarter of Major Ifajuna at Apapa. These included the officers who took part in the planning of the coup, namely Ifajuna, Anufuro, Okafo, Chukwuka, and myself. With us were a number of young officers, captains and subalterns who had only just been summoned from the officers' mess for the operations. Not more than 2 of them had previous knowledge of the operation. In other words, they did not know that this was going to happen. They didn't even know they were going to have any operation. One of these was a staff officer working with the Fajina, and the other was a subaltern working with Major Kafo. Neither of these 2 was Yoruba. How do I know? Let's quickly read. This is going to take time, but I think we can make it happen. We're going to read an interview granted by Foloyewole. Remember what this man said? He said that, one second. He said, let me read just one more time. It says here that at about 11 p.m., about 2300 hours, a group of officers were assembled at the military quarter of Major Fajina at Apapa. Then he mentioned the people that were there. He said this included the officers who took part. What he explained that the ones I'm about to mention now are the ones who took part in the planning of the coup, namely Ifajuna, Anuforo, Okafo, Chukwuka, and myself. There are 5. There are only 2 people that are not there of the original 7. One is the one coordinating the stuff in the north. The other person is Oji, Captain Oji, who eventually was going to work with Okafo because he was a captain. He was going to work with Okafo. And it must have been the subaltern working with Major Okafo. And then he says one of these was a staff officer working with Ofajuna. And then back to what I was saying. This included the officers who took part in the planning of the coup, namely Ifajuna, Anuforo, Okafo, Chukwuka, and myself. With us were a number of young officers, captains, and subalterns who had only just been summoned from the officers' mess for the operations or more. They didn't know about it. Not more than 2 of them had previous knowledge of the operation. One worked with Ifajuna, one worked with Okafo. The one working with Okafo is the OG that Ben Boulier mentioned, that both of them were the ones going to Irance's house. But there were other young people there. So let's listen to one of those young people that was, one of the young people there at the time. That we're going to read Fellow Yewole's interview. Okay. Oh, good. It was on the allegation that you were among the people that planned the coup that you were detained by the federal government. We want you to assess the situation then that really prompted the military to strike. And this is the answer from Folayewale. I was not one of the master planners of the coup. It will interest you to know that by 11:30 on the night of January 14, 1966, I had no clue about the coup, no clue whatsoever. So why did they link you? Then it says precisely, I was friendly with Emmanuel Fajuna, who was the brigade general, and then after they had planned and done everything possible, as the saying goes, some of the people who agreed to what they had agreed decided not to take part. It is a matter of getting anybody who could help, and by virtue of my position, I had a telephone in my house, which was the same thing that happened to most people there. The original planners started telephoning. Where are you? I want to see you. It was an emergency period. I was second in command to the transport brigade in Apapa, and we were on 24-hour alert. So like they will say something like this: something is happening in Ogbomoso, blah blah blah. Can you help out? We did get instructions 24 hours. It didn't come as a surprise. So that is what happened. They drove to my house at about 25 minutes to 12 and asked me to come to Ifajuna's house, which is where Ademega was talking about in his book that they gathered. Asked me to come to Ifajuna's house. I got there and I saw a lot of officers sitting down, and they had even finished what they were talking about, and they said, "You stay and I will brief you." Were you effectively court-martialed before you were detained? No. There was no trial, no court-martial, nothing. I tell you, I got picked up before 8 o'clock on Saturday morning, and a group of senior officers interviewed me. I told them what I know, and they said, "Go and wait." That was the beginning of it all. He said there that he was picked up before 8 o'clock. Another person was picked up before 8 o'clock. Let's go and listen to that person. We're coming back to this book. Oh. We want to check out another person that was picked up before 8 o'clock. By the way, this one is not even Yoruba. So no go be like saying a Yoruba agenda. He said he was picked up before 8 o'clock. He didn't know anything. He was called at 11:35 p.m., 25 minutes to 12. For what they done they planned since August. This was January 14th. So I'm going to read from Bengbule's book. I found it. God is good. Bengbule's book, Nigeria's 5 Majors. Take a listen to this. It says, one of such junior officers was Lieutenant Gibson Anyafulu of the Signals Apapa. According to him, he did not even know that a coup was in progress, although he was himself actively, if innocently, involved in its prosecution. Actively, if innocently involved in the prosecution. On the very night of the operation, at about 100 hours, that's 1 a.m., he was woken up by the BM of the 2nd Brigade, Major Ima Ifeajuna, and told to get dressed immediately because there had been an emergency, and hence the need for an internal security operation. Incidentally, the military push had coincided with Lieutenant Anyafulu's 6th week in the Nigerian army. He had therefore only little knowledge of the loaded Sten gun which Major Ifeajuna had thrust into his hands. In fact, he had not been amply acquainted with the mechanics of weapon handling as a whole. Later on, he was taken by Major Wale Ademoyiga to the P&T headquarters in Lagos Island, and left there with instructions to proceed to paralyze all the vital items of communication equipment inside the building. He set to work at once, without bothering to find out why. Indeed, without asking questions at all. Then, having completed the assignment, he did nothing else but wait for his superior officer to return. He waited long enough to become irritable. Finally, as dawn was breaking, he caught a bus back to Apapa. It was not until he was arrested shortly after his arrival at the officers' mess at Apapa that he realized he had just taken part in a botched-up military coup. What was his name? Anyafulu. Just like the other person, early in the morning, as he was getting home like this, they catch him. Sorry guys, there's somebody disturbing me in the comment section. I said there's another person. He mentioned, IBB mentioned Yoruba names. So we know for a truth, Adewale Ademoyiga was part of the planning, we know. Folayewale is the one we just read about, who said he didn't know anything until 25 minutes to 12 midnight. And it's corroborated by the book by Adewale Ademoyiga said a lot of the young people there did not know anything. It's also corroborated by this book by Bengbule, that Anyafulu, who is Ibo, was part of a coup, actively engaged, although he was innocent. He didn't know. Now let me read to you something from that same interview that Folayewale granted, where he mentioned Ganiu Adeleke, who is another Yoruba person that IBB mentioned. Number one. Brilliant. So he says here, so this is the question. You are at a point, according to your book with Captain Adeleke, the book again is called The Reluctant Rebel. You are at a point, according to your book with Captain Adeleke, another Yoruba soldier. Who was he? It says he was a colleague. He is the one who said he wanted to consult the family and we were friends. We both worked in Apapa before the crisis. He said he was going to consult his family. Let me read the full stuff. Let me go back up just a bit. It says here, I was not the only one. This is Fola Yewole. I was not the only one. There are some other people who did not know until that day. For instance, on the night people were briefed, a colleague, that's Gani Adeleke, was in the briefing and he told them, look, I have to consult my family. They looked at him and said, okay, go and consult your family. Just by the corridor, they told somebody, follow him. Maybe he will be the first casualty of the coup. Of course, what do you want him to decide? So simple, that gentleman is still alive today. That's the one now referred to. You are at the point, according to your book with Captain Adeleke, another Yoruba soldier. Then it says he was a colleague. He's the one who said he wanted to consult his family and we were friends. We both worked in Apapa before the crisis. Back to IBB's book now. If you don't compare these things, there will be a handicap. The only Yoruba person that was part of it was Adeleke. And he did it for two reasons. Number one was that they were going to have this revolution and change Nigeria, just like Zogu, very idealistic. And one of the things they said then was that they were going to release Awolowo from prison. He wrote about that in his book. Only that by the time you read Special Branch Report of April 1966, there was no plan for Calabar. The person that was supposed to fly the helicopter, something happened to him. Even the one that was supposed to drive to Enugu to go and do the one in Enugu, something happened to him. Something always happens. One day we should have a session on the coincidences of the first coup. The coincidences, like, and every coincidence had to do with the Easterners, not the Easterners, the Igbos. Every coincidence had to do with them. If you're an Igbo person here, this is not your responsibility. I'm not blaming you as a person. I'm just saying that if you read the Special Branch report, it says clearly that there were civilians who were politicians who were involved in the planning of that coup. If you read the educated elite in Nigerian society, you will see the claim, the case that was made for the coup by Igbo intellectuals. So this is not, I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying that in history, this group of people from your ethnic group have done terrible stuff. May God have mercy on all of us. Sure. Until you tell me that it's giving marginalization, that's why I tell you that don't bring Let's go back to the book now. So we're going back to IBB's book. It says it should be remembered that some non-Igbo officers like Adewale Ademega, Captain Gani Adeleke, Lieutenant Fola Yewole, and Olafemi were already mentioned. Ademega was part of the coup plotters. Those that, and I've told you why it did. Those other three did not know anything about the coup. They were coerced. And they were not the only ones that were coerced. Even young Igbo officers were also coerced. And one of them, we read about him in Bengule's book. The man's name was Ayafulu. He was actively involved. He was dismantling and disengaging, disabling communication networks in P&T. He was doing it. He didn't know what part of a coup. Let's go back. So he says here, it should be remembered that they were not Igbo. Another officer of Igbo extraction, Major John Obiano, crushed the coup. This John Obiano crushing the coup. You know what? My father used to say something when he was alive. He says, anything worth doing at all is worth doing well. God rest his soul. Let's do this well. This is Gowon, the biography of a soldier statesman by J. Isawa Eligo. Oh, great. Found it. For the first time, I don't want to go back to the beginning, what the exchange between Gowon and Ironsi. But it says here, for the first time, the implications of Ironsi's statement at the party dawned on Gowon, and he became suspicious of Ironsi and even of his Igbo girlfriend, Edith. He later found that his suspicion of Edith was misplaced. However, given his suspicion then, he quietly dressed up and went to the battalion headquarters to see Ironsi. Ironsi then briefed him. In fact, let me just go back a little so that it give us, so we have, congruence. After midnight on his way out of the party with Edith, Gowon remembers vividly having met the general officer commanding the Nigerian Army, GOC, Major General Ironsi. General Ironsi's remarks are still verdant in his memory. Ironsi had told Gowon and Edith, well, have a nice time. You never know tomorrow. Yakubu then turned to his girlfriend and asked, did you hear what the general said? The girl said no. He then repeated the statement to her and she retorted that she thought it was rude. Gowon replied that it was not only rude but vulgar, so they removed some of those words. Both of them then proceeded to Ikeja barracks, where Gowon was lodging. A few hours after their return, Gowon was woken up by a commotion at Ikeja barracks. He peeped through the window and saw Captain Martin Adamu, the battalion adjutant, from whom he inquired about the commotion. He was told that there had been a coup. Gowon became furious and chided the captain. Do you realize there is a coup? Why did you not tell me? He recalled much later that Captain Adamu looked very startled and it seemed that the real implication... He recalled much later that Captain Adamu looked very startled and it seemed that the real implications of what was happening had just dawned on him. He then informed Gowon that the GOC, General Ironsi, was at the barracks. For the first time, the implications of Ironsi's statement at the party dawned on Gowon, and I don't want to spend time on when he said, you never know tomorrow. That was a few hours before the coup started. About 2 hours actually, but let's just continue. For the first time, the implication of Ironsi's statement at the party dawned on Gowon, and he became suspicious of Ironsi and even of his Ibo girlfriend Edith. He later found that his suspicion of Edith was misplaced. However, given his suspicion then, he quietly dressed up and went to the battalion headquarters to see Ironsi. Ironsi then briefed him on the coup. Gowon then turned to Captain Adamu to know if he had informed the brigade commander, Brigadier Mamalari, of the situation. He was informed that the telephone lines were out of order. Why were they out of order? Because of what happened at the P&T. He was informed that the telephone lines were out of order and that they could not contact anyone. He tried the telephone himself and found it was a worthless effort. After his briefing, please pay attention. After his briefing, General Ironsi gave orders to the effect that it would take 2 hours before the first unit could get into town. This was the point at which Gowon really reacted. He asked about the approximate time the coup took place and found that the exercise had begun at about 3 a.m. He could not understand why it should take 2 more hours before the rebels should be tracked down. He then turned to his officers and tartly said, these people have got 2 hours ahead of us, and we are giving them 2 more. I give every one of you 15 to 20 minutes to get ready. He then turned around to the general and said, I am going. I don't want to go into what happened between him and Colonel Njoku, because if I do that, I would want to read down that book by Njoku, and there's no time. Here's the point. I don't even think people actually praise Gowon enough for what he did. Those who argue, back to IBB, those who argue that the original intention of the coup plotters was anything but ethnic refer to the fact that the initial purpose of the plotters was to release Chief Awolowo from prison immediately after the coup and make him the executive provisional president of Nigeria. Again, that is a lie. How do we know? Number one, in fact, I didn't explain something here. Let me explain it. When Gowon said, this was around 5 a.m., and Gowon said, and Ironsi said that they will be able to go after them after about 2 hours. What was he really doing? Was he trying to quell the coup or let the people get away? Was he trying to quell the coup or was he letting the people get away? He said it would take 2 more hours. I don't know. I mean, whatever you think is fine. Your answer is as good as mine. And then Gowon said, we've got to go now. If you read the book by Njoku, A Tragedy Without Heroes, I don't talk about what, I don't go into all of that. how Sin knew about what was going to happen and how Gowon thought Njoku had been part of the whole thing. But when he was writing, he wrote 7 Thompson Avenue, which was where Malari was hiding before he was then killed after he came out by Ifajuna. He wrote certain names. One of those names was OJ. Why? Why did he write OJ? He wrote Ifajuna. Why? At that time, Ifajuna and Okafor were in a car heading to Enugu. By 2:15 p.m., they were in Enugu. So how do I know? Go and read the book by Adewale Ademoyiga. You'll find it there. All right, let's just quickly finish because of time. So this is how IBB finishes this thing. It says here that those who argue that the original intention of the coup plotters was anything but ethnic refer to the fact that the initial purpose of the plotters was to release Chief Obafemi Awolowo from prison immediately after the coup and make him the executive provisional president of Nigeria. That is a lie. How do I know? Number one, if you read the statement by Cardinal Zogo, he made it very clear what kind of solution they were bringing. Let me read to you from his own speech. So this is radio broadcast by Major Chukwuma Cardinal Zogo announcing Nigeria's first military coup on Radio Nigeria Kaduna on January 15, 1966. In the name of the Supreme Council of the Revolution of the Nigerian Armed Forces, I declare martial law over the northern provinces of Nigeria. The constitution is suspended and the regional governments and elected assemblies are hereby dissolved. The aim of the Revolutionary Council is to establish a strong, united, and prosperous nation, free from corruption and internal strife. Our method of achieving this is strictly military. Our method of achieving this is strictly military, but we have no doubt that every Nigerian will give us maximum cooperation by assisting the regime and not disturbing the peace during the slight changes that are taking place. Our method of achieving this is strictly military. I'm going to read from Adewale Ademoyiga's book. But I want to read to you. Oh, beautiful. I found it. From Adewale Ademoyiga. So what did we see from Zogu? Zogu said, the aim of the Revolutionary Council is to establish a strong, united, and prosperous nation, free from corruption and internal strife. Our method of achieving this is strictly military. There is no precedent that this man was talking about, that IBB was talking about. They are going to make our lower president. They did not have that plan. Let's read from Adewale Ademoyiga's book. Ideologically, the core of the revolutionary officers had agreed on a program of action to be implemented if we had successfully taken the reins of power into our own hands. This program covered areas of politics, economy, education, social, and foreign affairs. Politically, we believe that our immediate step would be to correct the worst anomaly of the 1957 Constitution by breaking down the country into smaller units or states. In other words, the 4 regions which existed till January 15, 1966 were to die instantly, and on their dead bodies were to emerge 14 states, each of which would be conterminous with 2 of the former 26 provinces of the Federation, except Sokoto and Oyo states, which were to be conterminous with 1 province each. In effect, there will be 7 states each in the former North and South. These were to be governed by military governors, who would be chosen on their merit and loyalty to the revolution. We also believed in the immediate release of political prisoners of those days, namely Chief Awolowo, Jakonde, Anthony Naoro, Onitiri, Omishade, and so on. As we saw it, these actions would bring immediate relief to the suffering masses of the West and North, and would generate peace and concord throughout the Federation. There's something else they said. So if you see what they said here now, it didn't mention that they're going to make him president. They're just going to release political prisoners. The point is that the And he said they're going to have military governors and they believe in the immediate release of political prisoners. It did not say they're going to make anybody president. Let me say this, and this might shock you, but I'm sure a lot of you probably know this anyway. The first place that they claim that the coup, January 15 coup, was actually organized to free Awolowo and make him president. The first place that thing was published was in the Eastern Region newspaper. Question: what's the business of Eastern Region publishing that kind of news? And the first time that Nzogu said that thing was in 1967 when he was interviewed by Tai Sholari. Question: why did it take him 18 months to tell us about Awo after Awo was already out of prison? No. Before Awo was not out of prison at the time. After they had already succeeded, Ironsi had become head of government. Ironsi had become... No. Awo was out of prison. What am I saying? Awo was already out of prison. Awo came out of prison in August 12, 1966. It was in 67. They now told us that the reason for the coup of January 66 was to make Awo president. Even though, while Awo was in prison, he wrote a letter. You find this in his book, Adventures in Power, Book 1, My March Through Prison. He wrote a letter to Ironsi. He didn't bring him out. It took, some people say August 12, some people say August 2. But the Gazette for his pardon was on August 12, but it may have been released around August 2nd or 3rd. A couple of days after Gowon became head of state. He became head of state August 1. So here's the thing. You planned the coup in January. You were there for 6 months. You didn't release him. Somebody gets there in August, releases him a couple of days after he became head of state. And then in 67, you are now saying, oh, we actually wanted to release him and make him president. How now? Let's go back to IBB's book, Time to Law. So when we read from Ademega, it did not say they're going to make him president. Let's finish with IBB's book. It says, those who argue that the original intention of the coup plotters was anything but ethnic refer to the fact that the initial purpose of the plotters was to release Chief Obafemi Awolowo from prison immediately after the coup and make him the executive provisional president of Nigeria. That's not true. That's why I put it in quotes. He also put it in quotes. Then it says, the fact that these Igbo officers will do this to a man. Listen, no. The fact that these Igbo officers will do this to a man not known to be a great lover of the Igbos may be giving the coup a different ethnic coloration. But again, I may be wrong here. Since this view is speculative, I admit that my position here may be the naive insights of an unsuspecting young officer who viewed events from a distance. That's the end. That's the end. I admit that my position, they say I may be wrong here. But again, I may be wrong here. Since this view is speculative, I admit that my position here may be the naive insights of an unsuspecting young officer who viewed events from a distance. Where did this say it was not an Ibo coup? Of course it was an Ibo coup. Anyway, there was no time that this man said it was not an Ibo coup. He was just dilly-dallying. Some people say it's an Ibo coup, but it took on an unmistakably ethnic coloration. Well, maybe it's not an Ibo coup because they said there's going to become a kingdom. But maybe it was kingdom. But you know what? Whatever I say is the view of an unsuspecting officer. Like, I'm looking at things from a distance. That's what IBB said in his book. We just read it. So whenever you speak and they say, go and read IBB's book, ask them, have you read the book? So here's the summary or the conclusion of everything. That coup was an Ibo coup. And it was not an Ibo coup just because of his planners. There are three things to look at: the planners, the beneficiaries, and the victims. Or the planners, the victims, and the beneficiaries. The planners were mostly Igbos, but that could be a coincidence because there were more Igbo officers anyway. So you can't use that to judge. But actually, that's a major judge. Why? because it was planned to look a certain way, involving people from different walks of life, not just the military, even the civilian guys. And that much you will find in the special branch report of April 66. The victims of that coup, all the politicians that were killed, none of them was Ibo. The major officers were people that could be a threat to Iransi. They were unalived completely in the most gory way, right? It is true that certain people in that coup were revolutionary in nature, like Nzogu, like Ademoega. That's true, but they were being used. Why? How do I know that? If you read, where I did not read today, if you read Gowon's book more, you see what happened, between that. It was Gowon, if I read part of it, that it was Gowon who had to tell the boys to get on, to go look for the coup plotters. Left to Iransi, it was going to take them under 2 hours. But if you read, since we've been reading, let's read one more, right? Why do I like to read these things? Because I don't want people to say he's making things up, because it's not necessary. I don't think it's fair, to be honest, like to make things like this up. And also, like I always say, I wasn't there, so it's important to actually read the books of people who were there. That's the respectful thing to do. When I say respect, I mean respecting the listeners, so it doesn't look like I'm making things up. I am gift. Thank you. But they said, here's Ilarin Joku, by the way. This is Ilarin Joku. By this time, Jack Gowon had arrived. They called Yakubu Jack. I think I've said it here before. So these names are the same. Yakubu, Jacob, Jack, Jake, all those things are the same thing. So it's called Yakubu Jack. By this time, Jack Gowon had arrived at the battalion headquarters and was with us. We read from his own book what happened after he arrived. We're just going to connect very quickly. By this time, Jack Gowon had arrived at the battalion headquarters and was with us. Lieutenant Colonel Jack Gowon, who was sleeping in Ikeja military cantonment, just like he said in that book as well, that eventful night never forgave me for not sending for him specifically. It was impossible for anyone in my position to remember all the details in such a situation. I was not even sure I knew he was back from the party. According to the military practice, the alarm raised by the bugler was enough warning for all and sundry to turn out. But they said they would not kill anyone, the general said. Who was the general? Anyone can help us in the comment section. YouTube, Facebook, anywhere, Twitter, TikTok. Who was the general? But they said they would not kill anyone, the general said. Okay? Anyhow. Thank you. Thank you. But they said they would not kill anyone, the general said. That obviously was an admission of foreknowledge of the coup. Jack looked at me. None of us said a word. From this day forward, I was to lose Jack's confidence from all indications. He thereafter bore the impression or the notion that I knew about the coup beforehand. Iransi was the general. I'll read a few more things here very quickly. The general officer commanding asked for paper and pen. These I provided. He wrote down key points, KPs, and very important personalities, VIPs, to which troops were to be sent for protection. Listen, these include the Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation, NBC, the Parliament House, Post and Telecommunications, the Prime Minister, the Inspector General, the Brigade Commander, number 11 Thompson Avenue. That's around the Malari side. In addition, he listed some of the officers he wanted apprehended. This included Major Ifajuna, Captain Oji, and Lieutenant Nwokocha. Of those three, two were among the planners of the coup. He had lost his nerves. His hands were shaking. His writing could not be read without difficulty. I asked him to have some coffee. He was grateful, and coffee was ordered for him. Jack and I did not take the coffee. During a conversation, the general officer commanding repeated his earlier statement, but they said there will be no bloodshed. That was Iransi. Who had the day? They said was while they were saying that, let me finish that one, that this man said that he asked them, why are they still waiting? He says, after his briefing, General Rossi gave orders to the effect that it would take 2 hours before the first unit could get into town. This was the point at which Gowon really reacted. He asked about the approximate time the coup took place and found that the exercise had begun at about 3 a.m. He could not understand why it should take 2 more hours before the rebels should be tracked down. He then turned to his officers and tartly said, these people have got 2 hours ahead of us and we are giving them 2 more. I give every one of you 15 to 20 minutes to get ready. He then turned to the general and said, I am going. Curiously enough, Gowon observed that Colonel Njoku, who wrote the other book I just read, who had said nothing all this time, then asked him, if something happens to you, who would look after the boys? Gowon then retorted that if the officers who had been killed meant nothing to him, Njoku, they meant everything to Gowon. Number 1, conclusion. IBB did not say it was an Ibo Coup. Number 2, IBB actually said it took on an unmistakably ethnic coloration, Ibo Coup. Number 3, there was a revolutionary coup on that day. Number 4, this is not an attack on an ethnic group. It's just facts of history. Number 5, if you are okay hearing Northern Counter Coup of July 29, you shouldn't feel anything hearing January 15 Ibo Coup. And that's what it was. Why do we say that? Because it was designed to ensure that Igbos will be kept in power. We're going to have another session on this, maybe on Friday, maybe on Wednesday. We'll look at the book called Beckon to Serve by Shehu Shagari. In that book, he mentioned the things that happened, how they were going to have an Igbo president, who was Azikiwe, an Igbo Senate president, Nwafo Rizu, and an Igbo prime minister, Gowon Badiwe. It was planned work. We're going to discuss that on Wednesday, 4 p.m. if I time. Tomorrow we'll be here